We are completely tearing apart the heavily manufactured reality television narrative surrounding one of the most uniquely gifted, deeply introverted prodigies to ever grace a national stage. Imagine stepping into the incredibly intimidating, blindingly bright spotlight of America's Got Talent, fiercely gripping an acoustic guitar, and delivering a completely original, deeply vulnerable song about severe social isolation that instantly forces a celebrity guest judge to violently smash the golden buzzer. For a brief, highly explosive moment in time, Sophie Pecora was the absolute undisputed center of the global entertainment universe. She completely captured the shattered hearts of millions of viewers who deeply resonated with her raw, poetic, and fiercely authentic storytelling about surviving severe childhood bullying. However, as is incredibly common within the notoriously toxic, highly predatory machinery of modern reality television, the intense mainstream media spotlight eventually violently shifted. The young prodigy seemingly entirely vanished from the traditional commercial airwaves, leaving a massive, highly dedicated global fan base desperately wondering exactly what happened to the quiet teenager. Did she completely fall victim to the highly cynical, deeply crushing nature of the traditional music industry? Or did she deliberately step away from the blinding Hollywood lights to secretly build something infinitely more powerful? Our intensive investigation reveals that her life today looks completely, drastically different than anyone in the mainstream media could have ever possibly predicted. She did not simply fade into absolute obscurity. She completely took absolute control of her own massive destiny, actively rejecting the traditional corporate pathways to brilliantly forge her own highly independent, incredibly lucrative musical empire. To truly comprehend the massive, unprecedented scale of her incredibly successful independent music career today, our investigation must absolutely first examine the deeply complex, highly overwhelming psychological pressure she faced immediately following her television explosion. When the massive, multi-million-dollar television cameras finally stopped rolling, Sophie was abruptly left entirely alone to navigate the incredibly terrifying, highly treacherous waters of sudden teenage fame. The traditional commercial music industry constantly heavily preys upon young, highly vulnerable reality television alumni, actively attempting to lock them into incredibly restrictive, deeply predatory contracts that completely strip away their absolute creative control and heavily sanitize their unique artistic identity. Hollywood gatekeepers entirely expected her to quietly conform to a highly manufactured, heavily polished pop star image, actively demanding that she completely abandon the deeply raw, fiercely independent spoken word acoustic style that made her a massive viral sensation in the first place. Instead of safely bowing down to these incredibly powerful, highly intimidating corporate executives, the deeply introverted teenager made an incredibly brave, highly terrifying professional calculation. She deliberately chose to completely walk away from the highly toxic mainstream commercial machine, bravely deciding to heavily bet entirely on herself. This massive, fiercely independent industry pivot is almost always considered absolute professional suicide for a newly established television star. But Sophie was actively preparing to completely rewrite the entire modern digital rulebook. While the heavily manufactured, deeply cynical narrative of mainstream entertainment desperately attempts to paint a highly misleading picture of her sudden disappearance, our deep dive into her actual digital footprint reveals an entirely different, incredibly gritty reality. She completely bypassed the highly restrictive traditional media gatekeepers by aggressively pivoting her entire massive artistic focus directly toward the highly volatile, incredibly competitive landscape of social media. Armed absolutely entirely with nothing but her acoustic guitar, a simple camera, and her incredibly complex, deeply vulnerable original lyrics, she actively began to meticulously build a massive, highly dedicated digital cult following from the complete safety of her own bedroom. She brilliantly utilized highly aggressive digital algorithms on platforms like TikTok and YouTube to directly forcefully connect with millions of highly isolated, deeply anxious teenagers who desperately needed a genuine vocal champion. This highly relentless, deeply exhausting digital street-level hustle successfully actively built a massive, incredibly thick layer of professional armor that most highly sheltered, corporate-backed child stars absolutely never properly developed. She actively learned exactly how to successfully command a completely chaotic digital environment, fiercely, forcefully demanding absolute public attention entirely through the sheer, unadulterated power of her deeply raw, completely unfiltered acoustic performances. This massive, incredibly critical independent digital strategy completely, fundamentally, permanently altered exactly how she professionally approached the modern music business forever. Successfully surviving the incredibly toxic, highly pressurized atmosphere of immense digital fame actively requires a completely unorthodox, fiercely disciplined approach to long-term mental health. As her massive independent audience rapidly swelled into the millions, she actively began to completely loudly prioritize her absolute psychological well-being over highly superficial commercial metrics. Today, she brilliantly actively maintains an incredibly strict, highly protective daily mental health routine that she frequently highly openly shares with her massive dedicated global audience. Actively waking up incredibly early every single day without fail, she heavily grounds her highly sensitive artistic soul by meticulously engaging in deep gratitude journaling, loudly speaking highly positive daily affirmations, and practicing incredibly deep, highly focused silent meditation. This profound, highly necessary dedication to preserving her absolute psychological well-being has successfully, effectively, completely shielded her from the incredibly toxic, highly predatory internet trolls that constantly actively attempt to aggressively destroy young independent creators. She completely transformed the deeply agonizing, highly isolating social anxiety of her early childhood into a massive, heavily fortified psychological fortress. This newfound, deeply protected mental clarity directly, actively, successfully paved the completely, highly unobstructed way for an absolute, completely undeniable massive explosion of independent musical creativity that completely rivals the absolute biggest, most highly funded mainstream pop stars on the entire planet. As our special investigative report transitions directly into her current professional landscape, it becomes absolutely, completely undeniably clear that Sophie Pecora has brilliantly executed one of the most incredibly successful independent career survivals in the entire modern music industry. She has completely successfully transformed into a fiercely unstoppable, highly lucrative independent musical machine. In a completely massive, highly unprecedented display of sheer, unadulterated artistic work ethic, she has completely, quietly, meticulously written and independently released a staggering, deeply, highly impressive catalog of original music. She has actively, completely retained the absolute total ownership of her highly valuable master recordings, a massive financial victory that most highly seasoned, deeply famous mainstream artists entirely fail to ever successfully achieve. Her deeply emotional, highly authentic original tracks have successfully, organically, racked up tens of millions of organic streams across massive global digital platforms, completely proving that you absolutely do not need massive corporate radio play to successfully actively build a highly profitable, fiercely dedicated global empire. She brilliantly, highly successfully took the absolute darkest, most deeply isolated, heavily misunderstood parts of her quiet childhood and actively, successfully, completely transformed them into a deeply profitable, fiercely independent, highly celebrated global art form. Her completely unbelievable, highly victorious independent trajectory actively, deeply proves that you absolutely do not need to constantly heavily sell your artistic soul to a massive corporate television network to successfully, completely achieve lasting global relevance. The quiet kid who bravely sang about being heavily bullied on national television has officially aggressively transformed into the absolute ultimate independent boss, actively proving to the entire world that absolute, uncompromising artistic authenticity will always completely outlast the highly disposable, heavily manufactured hype of reality television.